Yeah.
You wrote a book before you were tired of dealing with guitar players that don't understand a thing about all this.
Well,
what was the motivation behind the book?
I had the same questions all the time from people. And it was, I lurk on the gear page. I see what people are talking about. I have a son who's 16 who plays the guitar. And there's all these things people want to understand, but they weren't really getting what it was, and they should understand it. You know, why the hell should I change my preamp to? What's that going to do? You know, and I just wanted to make something that was for musicians, and there was no book out there for musicians. It's all for techs, you know, who want to go in and solder this and that, and who cares about that? I wanted to make a book that people, the regular musicians like you guys, would be useful for. Useful to my son. It was kind of the concept behind it.
Took a while to
My wife and I did it ourselves entirely, except for the front cover and the picture of me. But other than that, we did it entirely ourselves, and it was 14 months. But it was 14 months of like work until 3 in the morning every night. It was. I wrote it, she edited it, she laid it out, we back and forth, and I know.
You met one objective for a guitar player in a book. It's fun to read. If it's not fun, then you start skipping section. It's fun reading. There's some anecdotes and.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's nice.
I try to put some anecdotes and cheeky little things in there. My wife took some out.
So what's the different food group of stuff that you're tackling in the book?
Oh, the book is like 3 different parts. The first part's like for people who are more newbies than you guys are, probably. You know, don't buy an amp because it happens to have rattlesnake skin on it, or things like that. And so the first part, so I got some recommendations for things I like and more really basic musician-oriented stuff. The middle part, I think, is the heart of the book and is most directed to you guys. I want to tweak on my amp. I want to change the preamp tubes. I want to change the power tubes. I want to change the speaker. I want to change my chords. What should I do? Where am I going? What am I trying to do? So the first chapter in the middle part is kind of like a roadmap of here's all the things that you guys can do to your amp. Either yourself or have Jeremy and his guys or whoever your tech is do to your amp. That's relatively simple. And then the last part, I try to get a little more technical. I've got a master's degree in EE, electrical engineering, but I didn't want to talk that way, And I wanted to get across. I play the guitar. I love to play guitar, and I'd rather deal with guitar players than engineers any day of the week. And I just want to get across the ideas that are behind an amp that you guys should understand. What the hell is distortion? I mean, and what is that doing? And we all kind of got it by just being around it a lot, but what is it from an engineering point of view, or if you look at the waveforms, what is it doing? When we're saying we're adding all these harmonics, what does that mean? So I wanted to talk about that. And you hear a lot of people saying about this piece or that piece in their amp, and I wanted to talk about that because, what does that really mean? Just give a kind of general roadmap for how an amp's built, and a few flowcharty kind of things. What's going on there? Where can I get distortion? Where am I running out of headroom? Kind of stuff. And that my motivation was to talk to you guys because I generally spent my life for the last 15 years talking to you guys, and I thought I should write it all down. So that was my motivation.
That's a clap.
Thank you. More questions, or?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah.
We typically get people coming in saying they're looking for a specific sound. They want to buy a new amp and they're looking for a different sound. And very often it's driven by, well, I like the Voxy sound or I like a Marshall sound. And immediately when we hear Vox, we think, okay, let's put them in EL84s. When we hear Marshall, we think EL34s.
Right.
Is that the best way to sort of guide somebody or for somebody to look at what it is they want? Or is there a different way that we should be approaching that?
I think there is more to it than that. I mean, EL34s, like you heard in this amp, what's the difference between EL34s and 606s? Like you can hear in this amp, the 606s are distorting more than the EL34s. A Fender amp is going to compress and fall apart more, especially like you hit it with a pedal, way more than a Marshall amp was because of a number of things, not just the power tubes. And a Vox, I mean, EL84s and EL34s are very similar. Those two, all other tubes are different than those two. Those two are actual pentodes, which I talk about in the book. All the other tubes are not. They're all fake pentodes. virtual pentodes, basically. The amp is more of a holistic thing than just the tubes. You know, if you go take, you know, some amp that's supposed to be a knockoff of a Fender, put some EL34s in it, it's going to be more like a loud Vox than it's going to be a Marshall, because it's going to have a squishy power supply. It's going to fall apart when you hit it with a pedal, but it's going to have a little more punch to it and a little more brightness, chiminess to it than a Fender would, because the EL34s are wider ranging than like an EL84 is. You have to look at the whole thing more. You know, Marshalls are different than the other guys simply because they happen to use stereo transformers and stereo tubes, so they don't fall apart. Fenders are different because Mr. Fender pointedly killed the bass in the output transformer. The output transformer in a Fender might be like this, and in a Marshall it'd be like this for the same thing. They did it on purpose to get rid of the bass, because if you have too much bass when you're distorting, it gets farty sounding. So Marshall used different tubes that had more high end, so he didn't have to kill the bass, and then they tweaked it a little bit to give it more high end because he wasn't killing the bass. So to answer your question, it's more of a holistic thing. If I were you, and I had these boutique amps in here that were, you know, this way or that, I'd play around with different power tubes in them. You know, somebody wants something that's got a little more grind to it, a little more punch, put some EL34s in it, even though it's made for 6L6s, and see what they think. It might be worth your time.
Do you damage an amp doing shuffling tubes without having yet finished the book? I mean,
Well, you got to bias them. You got to buy, you know, shuffling, biasing your amp, like I talked about in the thing, is like, I think we're all, most of us at least, are old enough to know what a carburetor is. Biasing your amp is like setting the idle on your car in a carburetor. If you don't set it right, it's going to be running too high. If you set it too low, it's going to keep stalling out on you. If you just take tubes and switch them, are you going to hurt your amp? No. You're going to hurt your tubes. They're going to glow red hot. You know, you'll burn them out, or it's going to sound like crap. But, you know, and I go into that at least, no, I'm just telling you, you most likely won't damage your amp if you just swap them. But you should set the bias properly. And it's like setting the idle on your car. To get the result, to play apples to apples. I mean, the one thing that's going on here, when I'm switching from EL34s to 6L6s, they were biased individually. So that's why I can do it. They're already set where they're supposed to be.
you approach a twin.
How would I approach a twin?
Yeah, for example, and try some British tubes. I've never thought of doing that.
Well, twins, especially if you have an old one, are very hard to bias because you can't do it from the outside. And what I say in the book is, if you can't bias from the outside, don't bias it, because you're going to hurt yourself. And you can, because you have to open it up, turn it on, and tweak things. That said, you can buy a thing like a Bias King, which is something you put in between the tube and the amp, so you can measure the bias. The problem with old amps is you can't measure it either. You need to be able to measure it. If you have to stick your leads in there and measure it 500 volts, you can kill yourself. The Bias King is pretty cool. It lets you measure an amp that doesn't have built-in measurement capabilities. You still have to get into it to change it, which is dangerous. But, I mean, there's Dumbles that came with EL34s, and there's Dumbles that came with 6L6s, and they're virtually the same amp. They're all Fenders. Dumbles are Fenders with more gain. I mean, to put it bluntly. But it's not a bad idea to put some EL34s in a Fender. You know, just to see, try it out. You know, but you got to be careful if you have to open it up. I mean, it is the same voltages as the electric chair, which it is. So, got to be careful. I mean, I know one amp maker who his sternum blew apart this way with 360 volts. All right, it's not, and this amp has 400. My Ganesha's, like Dominique has, is 520. Electric chair is about 480, I think. Okay, so yeah. Yeah, you can kill yourself really well with these things, so keep that in mind.
Don't try this at home.
Yeah. And if you ever work on an amp, put your one hand in your back pocket so that it doesn't go through and into your other hand like this, go through your heart. Always do this. It's
Doesn't
just
matter which hand?
doesn't matter which hand. Just get one hand away from it so it goes this way down your leg or something like that, but not across your heart, because that's what the electric chair does, is stop your heart.